Good afternoon, I'm James Watson, coming to you with a special report. In May of this year, the University of Warwick brought out a new policy to clamp down on the use of AI in classwork for students. AI has become synonymous with the broader student experience, with large language models like ChatGPT being rolled out and being integrated in internet culture and systems. Staff have quickly tried to clamp down on this and the use of AI in students' classwork. However, some staff and students don't see this as a limitation, but instead an opportunity to learn and grow alongside these systems. In this investigation, we take you behind the scenes into the minds of both staff and students to get to the bottom of an AI debate that is continuing to grow not only at Warwick, but at universities across the UK.
In the last few years, students, academics, and people across the world have seen the rise of AI, particularly since the introduction of OpenAI's ChatGPT. Since then, it has become increasingly embedded into both everyday life and education, becoming a central topic of discussion at universities like Warwick. With the speed of its rise being rapid, the initial reactions of university academics was one of shock, as well as caution for what it means for education and various academic fields and industries.
Yeah, I feel it's come on quite suddenly, the rise of AI, over the last couple of years. It's not something that I think I would have paid much attention to if I wasn't doing this job and thinking about how particularly it's affecting students and student expectations, and the main questions it's raised in the department are around assessment, which we might come on to, I suppose, but the kind of that sense of how we can manage how students are using AI with a broadly staff body who are not actually that familiar with AI themselves.
We've seen at Warwick, we've seen students using AI more in translation, either with permission or without. But in terms of the industry, I don't know. It's not quite my area, but my understanding is that it is used widely by companies and perhaps individuals, organisations who don't have much of an interest in the quality, but are looking to produce quantity. And that, I think, is part of the problem, and maybe we'll talk about that in a minute.
I think, worryingly, the use of AI is still a little bit kind of hidden away. People aren't being out in the open enough. I've heard from some students and staff about the way in which they use it. And also, I'm external examiner for courses at the Open University, so I hear about what their students are doing. And on the whole, I think people are pretty smart about knowing the limits of what it can do and the problems they might get into, and just using it intelligently for things like tightening up the way a piece of text is written, or helping them to decipher, but not completely understand. They're not looking for a full explanation of a text.
For students, there was also a significant amount of concern, as well as intrigue, as they grappled with how AI should be used appropriately.
Yeah, I remember sort of the introduction of ChatGPT very vividly. I remember it sort of coming out quite early on in year 12, and I remember sort of the initial sort of student reaction to it was one of sort of amazement and fascination. I don't think at that point there was much concern, but I think as sort of the months went on and we realised what this website could actually do, and sort of the value it could add, but also the sort of, you know, what it might mean for employment or sort of just, you know, technological stability. I think that started to creep on later on.
As students express concern that AI is threatening research roles and a variety of others, the perspective among most academics is that AI is not yet at the level to be an imminent threat to students' career prospects. Lydia Plath mentions how a lot of this fear may be coming from misinformation to boost AI companies.
I've seen that the Times has recently put historians as like the second biggest career under threat from AI. What do you think of sort of that assumption, and why do you think that's sort of been made?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So my understanding is it's come from some research that Microsoft did. And I think the first thing to say is that research is all designed to boost AI and to, as far as I can tell, to convince us about the benefits of AI. I think that historians have ended up on that list because there's a real misunderstanding about what historians actually do. And so if you imagine that our job is to just gather lots of information, facts and dates, then that is something that AI can do. I have questions actually about whether AI can even do that, but I think that's probably why it's on that list, is that kind of sense that historians are just gatherers of information.
From speaking to academics, it is clear that whilst AI is increasingly good at its functions, it is clearly not at the level to do much of the work humans do.
One of like a lot of the other AI stuff, the large language model is a big issue for translation, because by its nature it is fundamentally uncreative. I don't think that's an objective opinion, and I'm not a computer scientist, but my experience of it as opposed to human translation is that it's quite simply the side of translation that we're very keen on teaching here, not that this is a prospectus, but is the human creativity of translation, not just transferring the meaning across, but then actually producing something that is sort of stylistically and culturally acceptable for a specific audience. And AI rarely takes that into account. So there's that, and then there's just the perpetuation as well of all the troublesome stuff that goes on with large language models. You know, the sort of racial, gender stereotyping, and so on. It's kind of an opposite, apposite political commentary that we can find the internet full with nowadays. These models are reproducing that, and of course, the more sort of imperfect translation that goes on through these models, the more the models are filled with trash, the more this trash is replicated into the next. And it feels like from day one, you know, you've got this kind of perfect, clear orb of water, and we've dropped a tiny bit of dye in it, and that's just spreading and spreading and spreading, and eventually we'll have these models full of kind of stuff that's just replicating itself and isn't really useful to anyone. And I just don't, for that reason, I don't really see in translation or in anything else that there's, without radical change that we haven't seen so far, I can't see a viable future for AI, certainly not one to replace human intelligence or human creativity.
So there's definitely a shift in jobs. The design aspect is going to be more important, and the human aspect much more important. I've been a programmer. It's incredibly tedious, and I can't imagine anybody really wanting to do that as a job. Some people do, but you know, there's a lot more interesting stuff to do. I moved towards the design side of things, which the computers can't do effectively.
I don't think it's a threat to historians in terms of those of us who actually work as historians and do historical research. As things currently stand, and it's important to note that historians are terrible at predicting the future, but as things currently stand, the work that we do that involves detailed analysis, weighing up of evidence, archival research, none of those kinds of things can actually be done by AI because they fundamentally require thinking, and AI, the one thing it cannot do is think, at the moment, at least. So I don't think that kind of role is in danger. I do think there are some challenges for students and for thinking about the role of AI in a history degree, which is not quite the same thing as in the historical work that we do as historians.
In that case, then, should professionally students at Warwick, should they be considering an employment in a joint cooperation with AI? Should they see AI as a colleague instead of a competitor?
I would hope so. Yeah, I would hope that AI can't compete with our students anyway. I just think it can. I mean, when I see their work, it can't. And when I put my essay questions that I give to the students through ChatGPT, for example, it can't. It comes up with rubbish. You know, so and it may be. You know, we're constantly told, aren't we, that these things are improving all the time. And I still think it's got a long way to go to replace competence. That's not to say that AI and what we used to call IT skills, you know, more generally, aren't useful. You know, it would be naive, I think, to sort of pretend it doesn't exist for a political or moral reason. But I wouldn't rush to sort of start paying for separate AI courses, you know, if I was a student, because I think like there's such large skepticism about it, and there are still big questions in the AI industry about energy, about whether it's going to remain free at the point of use, which it is now. But I mean, you know, I can't imagine for much longer that all of these chat GPTs and so on will be free of paywalls and stuff, because they use so much at some point. these big tech companies who invested in all the infrastructure need to make their money back. So when that happens, people might start using it less. And so I think it's a changing picture. And I would kind of encourage our students to rely on their core tried and tested skills that are already appreciated by their employers.
One of the central discussions in this AI debate is whether AI can be useful to students when it is used for certain non-generative tasks. The new university policy has outlined that students must not use generative AI tools like ChatGPT to create content that is presented as students' own work. Many departments, like history, have allowed some use of AI, saying in their policy that students may use non-generative tools such as spelling checker or basic grammar checks. With this policy attempting to stop the use of generative AI in students' work, it is clear that significant steps have been taken to retain academic integrity across all departments at the university. Speaking to academics across the university, Warwick Journalism in this investigation was able to also understand how the perspectives of departments fare against limitations of AI.
From your like computer science background, like knowledge, how realistic would you say these fears are? Or like you mentioned, is the real threat and how the students choose to use it?
Yeah, it is how you choose to use it. And understanding as well how it might degrade your own capabilities. So a good parallel for this, AI, in fact, has been slowly becoming more and more present in lots of industries, and one of the main ones is the aviation industry. For a very long time, we've had increasingly sophisticated autopilot systems. Okay, and in the right away, as soon as autopilot starts to become possible, people are thinking about how that might degrade the capability of pilots to actually fly a plane on their own. And we've had more recently, as autopilot and plane control systems have gotten much more complicated, some really horrific crashes which have been caused by pilots not understanding what the machine is doing and then not being able to effectively take over. So pilots have to fly a certain number of hours without autopilots every year, and if they don't do that, they're disqualified. So they still have to be able to take over and run it, but actually not being able to take control back and fly the plane is really dangerous. So there's a whole legislative framework and lots of practice around that the aviation industry has just mastered, and this is no different. So every other domain, we should be thinking about that, and people should be thinking about, how is this making me dumb? Because I have a lovely saying, okay, getting a bit more radical, which is what this may be about to some extent is it's not about the big tech industry wanting to make the machines as smart as the humans, but making the humans as stupid as the machines. And that's what we have to guard against.
Even translation in perhaps the political domain, or interpreting anyway in those domains that we hear that AI, there's interest in AI there to replace humans. I think that's extremely dangerous, because the variation and the kind of breadth, the bandwidth of knowledge that the brain has, as opposed to a self-replicating model, I just don't think. I think it's it's apples and oranges.
But AI can't weigh evidence. It doesn't know, and it's specifically not designed to be able to tell whether something is good, rigorous, peer-reviewed scholarship, or whether it's just what somebody's put on X or Reddit or on a blog post. And so because our job is to be able to distinguish between those two things, and it at the moment can't really do that. So I think it has benefits, but they're relatively limited at the moment.
I think our issue is who owns the technology, big tech people, and how that's regulated and controlled. So that's a whole bunch of issues. But if it works out well, then we might be able to spend more time on actual experiences.
What would you say to students who still are concerned that AI could potentially be sort of wiping out the need for multilingualism, for example, in the job market?
Well, on that's a good question. Specifically on multilingualism, one of the problems with AI is that it's hugely English biased. That's a problem for AI, but I suppose it's not a problem for linguists, and particularly modern linguists who are learning contemporary modern languages, because there is still kind of major work to be done, I think, in the language modelling or the large modelling of languages across the globe, many of which we teach here. We teach 11 languages now in the language centre. And even, I mean, AI is okay in French, which is obviously is a major global language, but it's not nowhere near as good as it is in English. And I suspect in Korean it's even worse. And we do Hindi now, and I suspect it's even worse again in Hindi. So again, maybe that will change, but I think the skills that linguists learn in particular as well are not just restricted to the mechanics of learning and speaking and using a language, but also to I don't like the phrase, but the soft skills of interaction and communication, compassion, understanding difference. Those are skills and sort of knowledge that employers look for. Those are skills that we teach in modern languages here, and they are never going to be replaced by large language models.
With these limitations in mind and taken seriously, academics were also able to give us a sense of whether some elements of AI are useful and what AI might be useful when we consider it carefully and professionally.
Okay, so you mentioned like aviation is like maybe a beneficial way of AI use. Would you say like obviously there's clear threats that AI poses? Could it also be a tool to enhance learning, creativity, something we just have to adapt to in daily life?
Absolutely, but I think the key is to understand what it's doing, and also understand what you might be missing out on if you use it.
Do you think there are any benefits for historians and history students of using AI and sort of what can be done with it that's both like helpful?
I think there probably are. I will admit I'm not an expert in AI. Every time I've tried to use it, it has not given me very satisfactory answers. But one thing it is quite good at is giving feedback, actually. And so that's something we might think about how to incorporate is how, you know, when I've written something, I can say to the AI, what do you think I've said? And they tell you it back. And sometimes you're like, oh no, that's not what I meant. And helps you to reframe things or helps you to think with. So I think it has benefits for thinking with, but the important thing is not to ask it to think for us or to do our work for us. That's where it gets a bit dangerous.
Now, the discourse is sort of shifting, I think, because people are already, what are we, 2 years into, 2.5 years in, 3 years into ChatGPT?
Yeah.
If like it's a sort of big landmark change. We're relatively kind of close to that. Yet now already people are saying, oh, what are the problems? And maybe the positives. You know, there might be a positive if we can find one.
For students, I think AI will be more useful once you know how to do the work yourself, and therefore you can better gauge where it's adding value and where it isn't. But if you use AI as a shortcut, then what you're not doing is really getting the full value out of the history degree that you've come here to do. If it was as easy as just typing the question into AI and getting an answer, you wouldn't be spending 3 years studying. So I would encourage use of AI. I don't have a problem with students using AI, but I think that we need to be really cautious about making sure you understand what skills you're developing that are separate from those that AI can do, because what will make you stand out in the workplace is that you can do things that AI can't do, and that's going to be really important for everybody.
AI exists in a unique space, caught between roles as a disruptor and a unifier to the learning that students experience. As these models continue to become more sophisticated, staff and students will have to adapt to the world that these AI models create. Thank you for tuning in to this broadcast.